Good morning. I seem to have Mike. I'm hoping I saw it. It has the batteries in it when I got here, so I'm hoping that means that somebody took the batteries off the charger this morning and put it in the mic. Otherwise, my audio might drop out. I will be sure to put this here and watch the green light. Yeah, I think I'm hoping it'll be fine, and if it's not, I can recover. Peter's here today, which is good. Mind you, we have other people that I'm not seeing yet, but I'll keep out a weather eye for them. Just in case, yeah. Maybe I'll switch these out now then. All right. Doesn't count if it's in a foreign language. That's what HR told me. All right. All right, good morning, everybody. Huh? That's not the way it went? You and I have very different memories of that workshop. So good morning, everybody. How are we doing? How was the transit, huh? Not as many people on the SkyTrain. It's not so bad. I kind of love walking through the city because of this, because boot camp is like every day regardless. I end up working a lot of stat holidays, so it's kind of fun to walk through the city and imagine that a zombie apocalypse took place and that I am legending it through the streets, so that's fun. But yeah. What did we do last week? What was that all about? Rails, right? Ruby on Rails. How did we find Ruby? Somebody tell me what their impressions are of Ruby after having spent a week with it. I'm seeing some emotional expressions, but it's all right. Is there anything you found that was like, oh, I like this, that JavaScript didn't have? How easy it is to know what's private and what's not? I thought I heard something out of this section. It was in a lower voice. Active record, right? How are we feeling about Rails? It's cool. Still getting into it. Who has a very different feeling of it, like 5 days in than when they had, like when it was just, or like, you know, I guess now we're 5 days in, than the one you had when you were introduced to it? Yeah, Zoe? Anyone else? Everyone else is just as bewildered as when they were plopped down in the middle of it? Is that the idea? All right. Cool. Like I may have said, I don't know if I actually existed this in a lecture yet, but one of the differences between the first half of boot camp and the second half of boot camp is the first half of boot camp is like, look, chew it now, taste it later. You kind of don't have to know what you're doing. You just have to kind of make it work, right? And you get to the midterm, and you take a breather, and you come back. And the second half, because we're using frameworks and because the emphasis is on doing everything you did before, but now in a way that's a lot more like mindful and a lot more has to do with like, I know what I want, and therefore I'm going to make what I want, right? It's now what over how. I am really focused on my what. And you start to focus on building practices that are going to be, they're going to make you a more mature developer, more able to execute a vision, more able to create code that is sustainable, maintainable, scalable, and all those other fantastic little ibbles, right? So we're going to talk a bit about something that we introduced in a small way at the beginning, in the first half of the course, but we're going to make a bigger deal of in the second half of the course, and that is testing. We're going to be talking about this in the context of Rails, but I also, just like with every single lecture that I have given you this last week, I guess this last few weeks, I'm talking less about Rails. I'm less talking about the specific context of Rails, and more talking about like something that is true across frameworks, something that's true like in many places, regardless of what it is. So when you get to, if you get to your place of work and they give you Django, it's not like, okay, cool, I can just throw away everything I know about testing, because that has to do with like RSpec and all this other stuff. No, that won't be the case. And I want to talk about what we're going to be talking about is testing, and I want to link it back to your week 1, day 5, your kind of experience doing the test, the week 2, day 5 test and the mock test before, and just kind of what that testing looks like. So yeah, the world of testing. Now, testing is a big kind of deal, and there's some controversy on what tests should do, what they should cover, what kind of tests are more important than other tests, and I am not here to settle all of those questions, but we're going to be talking about one particular type of. We're going to talk a bit about different kinds of tests and what they do, a little bit about testing methodologies to start with, and kind of like so that when you hear these words, you'll have a little bit of context to be like, oh, that does that thing. So I'm going to start with the just the phrase automated testing. So what's this? Automated testing. Thoughts? A test that happens automatically. Yeah. By the way, all day for this, I love this lecture because there's a lot of like question and answer, a little bit like that. So just prepare for that. I'm going to be really gleeful and obnoxious. Yeah. So this is compared to manual testing. So versus manual testing. When you made your midterm app, how did you know it worked? How did you find out whether or not it worked? I guess I should be more specific. Huh? Manual testing, right? You clicked through. If you added a new feature, you clicked through whatever you had to do to get to that spot. You clicked through whatever like things had to happen before you even knew if it existed, and then you saw through. What happens if you make a mistake? Well, if it turns out that it doesn't work, you have to like debug and code, and then you go through that whole process again, right? If you are testing something that is on the tail end of a long process, and you have to manually test your way through like 7 steps of registration flow to make sure that on step 8, your postal code regex works, that's a long process. It'd be better to have, like, your time is precious. It'd be better to have a computer doing that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's, I'm going to repeat Mish word for word. I'm just making sure you get credit on the video, right? Just so that, like, a bit of our, I'll share my royalties with you. So that, yeah, it's really stressful to be like, I thought this worked, and then it, like, some business people came back and be like, hey, this doesn't work, and you have to, like, weren't able to catch it in your manual testing. So we are going to be working with automated testing. Automated testing covers a big thing, including like a lot of techniques and a lot of methodologies. So here is question: what unit test? Who's ever heard of a unit test? Okay, what do unit tests test? Units, absolutely right. I know. So what is a unit in this case? A unit is a small piece of code by itself. So we'll be testing a class, or we'll be testing we're testing a model or a controller. We might be testing a function. We might be testing a series of functions, right? We might be testing a method on a controller. That's a unit. It's a small piece of code. Now, the idea is that we should be able to test this code on its own. So the best, I'm going to say this. Okay, so testing I remember the moment this struck me as like, oh yeah, that's a thing. So we talk about code. Code should be reusable, predictable, and modular, right? Like that. Those are some good things, right? Like if your code works here, it should work there. The less predictable it is, the worse a piece of code it is, because it's going to not give you the right results all the time. If it's not modular, that means that it's tightly coupled, and if this changes, that means this code is now, like even if it's predictable, given that this is how it is, if they're really kind of tightly coupled together, then as soon as this part changes, then this part doesn't work anymore, right? So these are good things to want for your code, is for it to be like modular and predictable, right? Well, what is a unit test? A unit test is basically taking a bit of code out of its context, providing a context for it, and making sure it acts as predicted. Testable code is modular and predictable. By definition. If we are able to test it, that means that we reused it and confirmed its predictability. Yeah? So, testable units are, by definition, modular. Bom dia. Modular and reusable. Okay. All right, so then there are system tests. Now, David's already like, you don't have to do it. We know what's going to happen. What do systems tests test? Right. Right, systems test systems. So it's like now we are testing. These are sometimes also known as integration tests. There are some integration tests that wouldn't be considered systems tests. Like you might be testing like one integration out of a system that has many integrations, right? You might be testing, hey, does my front end talk to an API? Which might be different than does everything absolutely work, right? But integration tests, basically system tests will test an entire system, right? These are, there's kind of an overlap between system tests and integration tests. There's an overlap between that and what we might call E2E, end-to-end testing. An end-to-end test, just like, okay, I start from here and then I go there and get back. And system tests are focused on, they're focused on like, I guess an end-to-end test isn't a specific type of test, it's a description of a test. A test is an end-to-end if it goes from here to all the way there and then back. And there's also feature tests. Now, here's a question. What do you think, so I can't even get all the way through it. What do you think that feature tests test? Features. Feature tests test features. And tomorrow you're going to be getting into feature testing. But the idea is with feature testing that I describe a thing I want to do. I want to be able to, and I describe the interactions required to do that, right? So I want to be able to put my email in find an email block, put my email in there, find a password block, put my password in there, press login, and if I am already a registered user, I should be directed to this specific page and it should have my name on the top somewhere, right? If I am not a specific user, it should tell me that email and password combination isn't found in a something. Like you can define what that means through interaction, but it's the sort of thing you would be doing manually and now you're kind of automating out. Does that make sense? Okay. Tomorrow you're going to find out more about that. Okay, so there's also a term called regression testing. this doesn't conform to the same like question. It's not quite as obvious. Does anyone can anyone think what regression testing might be? Has anyone ever heard that term? Anyone have a clue on that? So regression testing is this. You make feature A work. You start working on feature B. Feature B now works. Does feature A work? If feature A, so we run the test for feature B and we run the test for feature A. If feature B works but feature A is now broken, that is a regression. That is a regression. So regression testing checks to see that other functionality has not regressed. So yeah. Now there are a lot of testing methodologies, and I want to talk about two terms you're going to hear a lot about, and that is BDD, which you guys, I know you would have seen in the readings already, behavior-driven development, and the other one is TDD, which is, anyone know? Test-driven development, that's right. So I'm going to talk about the difference between these two. You could basically say that TDD is a more specific subset of BDD. There's a really strict form of it that Robert C. Martin has, aka Uncle Bob. He's this guy who's been talking about software for a lot. He has some really great talks on YouTube. He had one called The Scribe's Oath, one about the future of programming. He said a thing that still blows my mind. He did this one thing that was about the history and the future of programming. And he started with Alan Turing, where you had one computer and one programmer, right? Out there at Bletchley Park. And then he kind of charted the growth of computers and the growth of programmers as a population, as a species. And what he found was that the number of programmers roughly doubles every 5 years. When you count for attrition, that means that in 5 years in this profession, you'll be senior to more than half of your profession. In 10 years, you'll be senior to over 75%, over 80, like probably close to like 80% or more. I am senior to 80% of my profession, and that effing terrifies me. Just so you know, because I get into a car that I know has like 1 million lines of code, and I really try not to think about that. I try to tell myself that's 1 million lines of code in the entertainment system. It just that's the Bluetooth code, not anything to do with me. So, but yeah. So he has this thing called the 3 laws of TDD. 3 laws. I might make these one of those. So 3 laws of TDD. So law number 1. You must write enough of a test. So you must first write enough test. Right? Only just enough tests to cause a failure. And compilation or undefined is not a function, is a failure. So if you just wrote a test and you just said, hey, I want to get something out of this one function, and you know it doesn't exist yet, that's where you need to stop. You've written enough test to cause a failure. 2. I'm going to say 1 because this thing's going to freak out of me anyways. You must only write enough code to cause a failing test to pass. 3 just flew out of my head. 3 laws of not robotics or thermodynamics. TDD. You are not allowed to write any production code. You are not allowed to write any more of a unit test. But Uncle Bob. That's his website. But Uncle Bob. And what's number 3? You are not allowed to write any production code unless it is to make a failing unit test pass. You are not allowed to write any more production code than is sufficient to pass the one failing unit test. So you more code than sufficient to cause a failing test. I feel like number 1 and number 3 are kind of the same. Number 1 and 2. Yeah, you are not allowed to write any production code unless it makes one test. You're not allowed. You are not allowed to write any code or any more code. Is basically how that works. Okay, so this is super strict, and a lot of people who work on TDD would say that's stricter than I like my TDD, right? Because it doesn't really give room to refactor. It doesn't really give room to like optimize or do code clarity, that sort of thing. So the more general form of TDD, general? I am not typing well today. More general form of TDD is red, green, refactor. So red is write a failing test. Green, make it pass. And refactor. Fix your code for performance and readability, making sure it still works. Okay? All right, so here's some of the differences between TDD and BDD. With TDD, you must write the test first. In BDD in general, you can write the test before or after. With TDD, developers write the tests. With BDD, anyone can write the tests, including QA, business analysts, UX designers, etc. Right? Like this can be written by anyone before or after. They can write, hey, this test should work like this. TDD is really obsessed with unit tests. BDD is kind of any kind of test. So they have different things, and you can have a unit testing, like I have my software development lifecycle has unit testing in it, has test-driven development in it, and then there could be a larger BDD lifecycle around it, right? TDD is really for us. I write a test, I make my code pass. And the great part about TDD, especially like, it's often presented as a discipline. You should be doing TDD. The only way to write dependable code is TDD. And that's an argument some people have. It's not, there's controversy in that. There's good arguments for and against. But I will say that you can't just be like, fine, I want clean code, I'm going to start doing TDD, and then you just do that. It's not that simple. And it's not that simple because Because learning to test is a skill on its own. Learning the techniques of testing are themselves independent skills. Okay? So before you're like, I'm going to test, like, I'm going to do TDD on my React app, you should look up how to do TDD in React. You should look up what the best practices are for testing a component. You should look at some of the controversy, and you should try it. Try testing a component. Is a skill unto itself. And some things are easier to test than others. The closer a bit of code is to a pure function, the easier it is to test. One of the reasons I really love the Redux framework. Who's heard of the Redux framework? Who's just heard that kind of word used around? One of the reasons I really love the Redux framework for doing complicated state management is because all your app logic is expressed in a reducer, which is not all your apps, the most of your app logic is expressed in a reducer, which is a pure function. So I can test the crap out of my reducer, just test that reducer all day long just to make sure it does the things. And I get to make sure that my app works. That given these inputs, it will give this output. So, all right, we're going to talk about the anatomy of a test, and I have good news. We're going to do some JavaScript. Yay, JavaScript! Is not everyone else as excited as I am? Because I'm pumped. It's too much. I heard it. I heard it. So, JS demo, right? Right. So npm init dash not equals y. That's not what I wanted. Dash y. Cool. npm add. And I'm going to add this as a. Is it dash save dash dev? Yeah. I'm going to add this as a dev dependency. This Mocha. You don't always have to do it as a dev dependency. Sometimes, but I'm going to. So there we are. And I am going to say, I'm going to take a look at my package JSON here. And I'm going to say here test is no, it's // yeah. .bin/mocha, which I should have .bin/mocha. There it is. And I'm just going to make sure that this works. Cool. No test files found. Awesome. So I'm going to add some test files. I'm going to say make. I'm going to say touch. I'm going to make a. I'm just going to do the. Help me out here. I'm just going to do a simple function. Do I want to do? Yeah, I want to implement my own reduce function. Sure. So touch reduce.js and touch reduce.test.js, I want to say. Cannot find patterns matching. Could not find any test files matching. Is it tests.js? You know, maybe I'm just going to add mocha // I'm going to tell it which file in particular. Okay, cool. So I have 0 passing tests. I have 0 failing tests, which I think is why it's green. Cool. So I'm going to do a bit of test-driven development. I'm going to open up my reduce.js, and I am going to open up my reduce test.js. Okay, I guess I can only do one at a time to start with, at least. So here, I want to start building the anatomy of a test. I'm going to say that I am going to describe, and I'm going to say what bit of code I'm going to describe. This just has to be a string reference here. So I'm going to describe hashtag reduce. It's a pretty common, this is a convention, pretty common, like if you're going to use a function or a method, you use the hashtag. So hashtag reduce, it's going to take in a reducer and a seed, and I'm going to make it return a function that takes in an array. No, that's too much. That's too much. I get it. I see you. I get it. It's too much. No currying. No partial application this early in the morning. It's fine. You guys are going to see me do some of this, though, later in the week, which you have that to look forward to. So then I have to make a callback here. All right. 0 passing still. So this is me describing which bit of code, what code am I testing, right? Actually, I'm going to put the R first for reasons. So I'm going to say, okay, this is the code that I'm testing. And I might have some, the simplest version would be like it, and I'm going to describe something. It returns the seed if the array is empty, right? Cool. So I have one pending test now. Okay, and you can see I'm starting to get the reduce array reducer seed returns the seed if the array is empty. Now you'll notice that this is all. I haven't done any code yet, really. This is all pretty much just English. Okay, and I'm you know what? It might be that I have a few things that I want to do, like if this is. I might have a few contexts. I might have to be like, you know what? Here's the code I want to do if this is the case. If I were doing a login thing, I might be like, if the user exists, here's the things I want to do with it. If the user doesn't exist, here's the things I want to do with it. So I'm going to describe a context. And in Mocha, context is just an alias for describe. It's just another word for the same thing. So the context is array is empty. Turns the seed. Do another context when the seed is missing, it performs a reduce with the on the array after the first with the first element as seed. Or maybe it throws an error if the array is missing. And outside of this context, I'm just going to put it here that just says it it basically iterates over the array, reducing it to one value. Okay, take a look at this real quick. What is this? This just by itself, this thing I have here, if you just saw this by itself, no context, what is it? It's my expectations. It's a specification for the reduce function. It is documentation for the reduce function. One thing you're going to find sometimes is that the word test is interchangeable with the word spec. It's a specification. So these tests not only describe to a computer whether a bit of code or a system or an integration or a feature passes or fails, it also describes in very unambiguous terms what we expect it to do. Which means that if you're using TDD and you're like, oh, I should write documentation, that is documentation. Immediately. So let's actually make this happen. Now, technically speaking, I guess this is still test-driven development because I haven't written a failed test. I've just written kind of enough tests here. I've just had the outline of tests. And in fact, one person could have written these and handed these off to me, right? Someone could have said, hey, here's all the expectations of the reduce function. You decide how this works. OK. So as a test writer, I'm going to do this degenerate case first. I'm going to pass it a callback. Now what happens if I just pass it a callback? It passes. Why did it pass? Well, almost. It's empty. This is, again, one of those stupid questions. The reason it passed was because it didn't fail. I was really hoping for a few more groans out of that one. That's one of my favorites. Tests have an innocent till proven guilty policy. Everyone say innocent till proven guilty. And you are all guilty of not responding to my innocent till proven guilty. You're all terribly guilty of probably being kind of tired. So, and calling a boot camp student kind of tired. It's like referring to Santa Claus as kind of stout. OK. It returns a seed. So I actually have to write that this should do something. So I'm going to say const reduce equals require /reduce, right? And I am going to say that reduce. So I'm going to break this out to a few more things. Const empty array equals the const who cares reducer equals a b b, right? This is just how the reduce works, if you remember. Const seed equals, I might even just make it an object so I know it's exactly this one. It's not just doing some hoodoo. All right? Reduce const output equals reduce empty array who cares reducer seed. And what I should have is, I'm going to say if output bang equals seed. That's too many. Frickin' JavaScript. All right. Then I'm going to throw new error. The output did not match the seed. Type error. Reduce is not a function. That is correct. Reduce is not a function. So let's create that. Now what I love about TDD is I like playing what I like to call asshole chess. So you're playing a game of chess against yourself, and one of your characters that you are playing is like the product owner, the person who just needs this to work as perfectly as possible. And the other person you are playing is the laziest programmer on the planet. What's my error? What's my error? Reduce is not a function. Cool. Look, I no longer have that error. Oh, the output did not match the seed. A, B, C, return C. Hey, I passed. Oh, let me refactor that. Array, so I'm going to say items. My pass still test? Yep. My pass still test? Does my test still pass? Awesome. I am meeting all my expectations with flying colors, aren't I? There's another way to rewrite this. So here I kind of wrote manually a throw error. And throwing an error, by the way, is what causes a test to fail. Or raising an error in Ruby. But what I can do is I can use something called the assert library that comes from, that's just native in Node. So I'm going to use that. Assert. And I'm going to assert dot equal output and seed. Generally speaking, when I'm trying to make sure that objects are equal, I'll use deep equal because I wanted to make sure that they are like identical. But this is just, hey, is this exact thing the same as this exact? Like, are they pointing to the same object, right? Assert dot equal output and seed. If I take out this, assertion error undefined equals that. If I put this back in. Okay. Performs a reduce on the array after the first with the first element as seed. Okay. Throws an error if the array is missing. Ooh, throwing errors. I like this. Or throw the error if the array is empty. Now I should obviously be checking to see, hey, what happens if array is null and that sort of stuff, but for right now, this seems like an easy one. Throws an error if the array is empty. So I'm going to say here, const empty equals const stupid reducer equals AB true, because who cares? Don't care. I just want to be able to call it with something, right? And then stupid reducer. And then const. And then I'm just, yeah. I should throw an error. So I should actually check to see assert dot, there is assert dot throws. So I'm going to create a function and hope that it throws an error, which is reduce empty stupid reducer. And I'm going to expect that it is going to throw a something like cannot reduce empty array without seed. Okay? So I have enough tests here. Let me just make sure it doesn't work. Oh, missing expected exception. Cannot reduce empty array without seed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to reduce. I'm going to say if seed is undefined and items.length is 0, throw new error, and here I'm going to copy cannot reduce empty array without seed. And it passes. Let's actually do the iterate over the array, reducing it to one value. So this says, let's do a summation. Summation's a good one. Const nums equals 3, 5, 6, 12. Const addition equals a plus b. const seed. Let's make a seed that's already like bigger than something. So let's say it's 4. So we should expect an output of 4 plus 3 plus 5 plus 6 plus 12. That is 18 plus 8 is 26 plus 4 is 30. So const result equals reduce nums addition seed assert dot equal result. The actual will be the result and the expected will be 30. Right? So here I'm going to say, that's good. That returns seed thing, I'm going to say if items.length is 0, return seed. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and do the loop. Let current equal seed for const item of items. Current equals reducer current an item. Return current. Right? And let's see if this works. Yes, that works. And then performs a reduce in the array after the first with the first element as seed. That's one more test I need here. The first element of seed. I am going to expect that const nums here (3, 5, 6, and 12). Const addition equals a plus b. Const result will be equal to reduce nums addition. And I'm going to expect this now to be 3 plus 5 plus 12 plus 6, which is 26. Assert dot equal result 26. So basically what I'm going to say here is that, and I might make a I might nest this. Cannot reduce empty array without seed. Else I'm going to return. Well, I think I want to use this again, so I'm just going to say function reduce items reducer seed. Let's make sure that that change itself. Okay, and the return here is going to be return reduce or const first rest equals reduce return reduce. So I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to pass in rest the reducer and the first. NaN equals 26. Oh, sorry, first is not reduce item. See, it helped me catch that. If I'd just been writing this being like, yeah, that's right. Also, what? Rest, reducer, first. NaN is not 26. You're right, it's not 26. Return reduce. Okay. So now I can console.log items seed It's empty. Result equals reduce nums addition. Get the array is empty. Reduce RC. Reduce. Should have 2 of these, right? Oh, 3, 5, 6, 12, undefined. Oh, of course, I forgot to change that. My bad. There we go. And now I can take out that console log. So I've now created a reducer. Or I've now created this reduce function. I have it, and I also have, like, I can say npm test, or actually let me even say mocha reduce.test.js reporter markdown. And I now have complete documentation on exactly how my code works. If you're wondering how the reduce works, you can now go down to this code and see exactly how it works. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple more things, and then I'll let you guys get some coffee. So I'm going to make a new Rails project. Rails new blog. Should have said to skip a couple things. So give me a second. Try Rails new blog. I am going to say skip test because we're going to put our own test in here. And while I'm at it, skip active storage. The active dash storage? Guess we'll find out. I think it's just active storage. Okay. And the library that Rails comes with for testing is called Minitest, but we're going to be using one that's a little more common called RSpec. So RSpec Rails. Rails spec for Rails 3. It's going to be pretty simple. We're just going to add this. Sort of the gem file. I'm going to make sure that works. So I just put stuff in my gem file. What do I do? Bundle. Could not locate gem file. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. If I look now at my Rails --help, I'm going to see that I have spec in there now. If I look at my Rails generate --help, I have a really important little file called, or little thing called rspec install. You're going to see this actually really frequently as a pattern in Rails, is that you're going to bring in a gem and they're going to expect you to run a generator to sort of set up whatever it is you're setting up. So Rails G rspec install. Okay, so now that it's done that, I'm going to make a scaffold. Rails generate scaffold article title string content text author string publish date. You'll see that One of the things that got added to all of this now is that there's a spec for kind of everything. Article spec, request article spec, yeah, RSpec model article spec. So when I say now Rails spec, I probably have to do a migrate, yep. Rails DB setup. All right. So, got a lot of pending, got some passes. Now we're only going to, if we look at the Rails spec -- help, we'll be able to limit ourselves down to which ones we run. So I can say, pretty sure I can do that. Rails models, oh sorry, Rails spec model. Or I can run RSpec models. There we go. Okay, I'll fix that in a second. Okay, so we are now able to set up, we are able to run tests on our Rails. When we get back, we'll get to how we're actually going to be building our tests for Rails. Hey, y'all. Oh, it is so much fun to overhear these conversations about final projects. I get super excited. I will say that every now and then, like when it comes up to final projects, I feel like that high school teacher who's a little too interested in who's taking who to homecoming dance. Where it's like, are you guys gonna form? Who did you find someone to form a project group with? No, I haven't found someone yet. Well, you'll find someone. It'll be fine. You'll have so much fun. Yeah, it's not like that. All right. I will definitely say that some of the things that that work with one's personal relationships is also true of one's professional relationships. In terms of, you know, good to have something to offer. It's good to recognize when you're in a relationship that's not become mutually beneficial, that sort of thing. But that is a talk for another day, and also one that I will probably never do. So, okay. Our spec. So, if we look at our folder structure here, is my gem file, but we see, oh, why did my blog went into my JS demo. I'm going to separate those out. That's fine. So here we have a spec folder that was created, and it has a bunch of stuff: controllers, helpers, models, requests, routing, views, including a Rails helper. And the spec helper kind of comes first. This kind of sets up our spec itself. Configure. So when you're going to add some stuff to RSpec, which we're going to do in this lecture, this is the main part it's going to go. The Rails helper is that, but also like RSpec Rails specific stuff. So RSpec can be used outside of the context of Rails. It's just Ruby spec. And if you are looking, if you take nothing else from this lecture, and you won't, let's go to, there's a great website called Better Specs. There's also bees. On an unrelated note, everyone gets bees. I don't know why that came up. I just saw it and was like, I want to share that with you. One of my favorite things I always waited for with a cohort was to talk about the map function and how it's like you take an array of type A, so it's full of A's, and you have a function that turns one A to a B. So if you did A's.map A to B, what would you be left with an array of? And they kind of look at me, and then I'm like, well, obviously you'd be left with an array, not of better specs. That's not the point. Not best either. What is going on with my... You have an array of B's. So if you're remembering how map works, that's it. Take an array of A's, function that turns an A into a B, and you get B's. So okay, Better Specs. This is an amazing website that has a lot, like this will teach you a lot about testing in general, about the mechanisms of testing. How to describe your methods, use contexts, you know. So we did context a little bit ago, right? So this has more contexts. It, blah, 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 when not valid. Single expectation set test, that sort of thing. Expect versus should. There's been a change. This is actually just an English language sort of thing that we're using. We're generally going to use the expect language, not the should language. All right, so let's actually take a look at a test. We're going to run the models here, and I'm going to run this article spec. So this is a spec on the article model class. You can see it says rspec.describe article type model, so it's going to be doing model-y sort of things here. And you see it says pending, add some examples to or delete file. So I'm going to change this to it. Look, guys, we have our describe. We have our it. That's a thing, right? That's totally a thing. That looks familiar. So I'm going to do it, and I just have a string. Well, if I did it in the JavaScript version and just had a string, what would that mean? That this test was? Starts with a P, and its ending is an ending. All right, so it's pending. So if I run rspec spec models, I'm going to see, oh, I have one example, one failure here. Article. So that's pending. Cool. Now this is one of the kind of the promises of Ruby was that it was really easy to define a domain-specific language. It's basically so simple, even a CEO could use it. It was like you could write out some like plain text and that would just be a thing. So this is another example where the article is going to be able to do some stuff. For instance, it must have a title. You know, have some content. We could even throw something in here like its content. It must have content that passes the obscenity filters or something like that, right? It filter, right? So when we're doing this stuff on a model, which is going to be your real focus of the next couple days, yeah, we're just kind of checking probably like validations is a big thing we'll be checking against. It must have published date, right? So now I have 4 pending things, right? Not yet implemented, not yet implemented. So how do I implement a test? Well, in my reduced test.js, for me to implement a test, I had to pass a callback to the it function. So what do you think I am going to do here? Do. And then I'm going to end. Right? And now if we run that, 4 examples, 0 failures, 3 pending. We have a green dot. If I raise a little hell, we have 4 examples, 1 failure, 3 pending. There's my pendings. There's my big red F. I think one of the interesting things about being a developer is that before big red Fs were like, oh no, and now I'm like, what's the deal with that big red F? And like you start to look at it. When I was in the U.S. Air Force, when you go through boot camp, you get yelled at kind of a lot, right? You're just going to have some dude just screaming in your face. And it's going to bring up all the sorts of feelings that some stranger screaming in your face will have, right? It's humiliation, fear, anger, threat, like all those sorts of things, right? And what ends up happening is that by the end of it, and into my career, someone yelling in my face, it was no longer about like, oh, this is terrible, oh, this sucks. It was more like, there were a few times where I'd have a sergeant just screaming in my face, and my only thought would be, you know, his heart's not really in it. Poor guy, he doesn't want to be a first sergeant. This isn't really his deal. I just want to hug him. I feel so bad for him, right? And sometimes you have someone screaming in your face who comes up with this mind-bending trick. You're like, oh, well played, sir. All right. Yeah? Being a programmer has taught me the same thing, is that like when an error comes up, a big red F, I look at it and I'm like, oh, well, what failed? We can fix that, and then we'll be done. Yay! Right? It becomes more about like, oh, look, another achievement to win, another achievement to unlock, another badge to win. So let's no more raise little hell. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say new article equals article dot new text some stuff publish date 2 days. Is it from now? Right? And I'm going to set what my expectation is. And my expectation is going to go like this. I'm going to pass in the value that I'm going to be checking about. I expect new article dot valid dot to be. No, sorry, it's dot to. And then I'm going to pass a matcher to it. False. Okay, so let's run this. So I expect new article.valid to be false, right? And I can take out some of my parentheses here if I wanted to, but I'm just going to leave them in for the sake of clarity. Like, in fact, I'm going to add one more here. Okay, unknown attribute text for article. Right, it's not text, it's content. Thank you. Okay, what's my problem? I expected false, I got true. This is my expectation, this is what I actually had. This is my, sometimes it can be expected in any. Okay, cool. I want this to actually validate. So I'm going to go to the article, and I'm going to say validate title presence true. When Eric said unknown present keys. Did I call validates? Yes, probably. I always get confused about which ones validates and which ones validate, but I can make mistakes in code, that's fine. Okay, so now I have a passing test. Huzzah. All right, what is, part of the point of these tests should be that they have some semantic value. It makes sense when I'm testing. So, David, what's the point of this test? Like, why am I writing this test at all? Oh, no. I must not have written a very good test. Well, what do you think that line 7 means? Right? But, okay, let's take what you just said. Expect new article to be valid. Oh, wait, I expect it to be false. Right? This is kind of an unclear thing. So what would be great is if we could actually bring in something that's more specific to, if we could express this in a way that makes a little more sense in the world of Rails. If we could bring in a more specific, what we'd call matcher. Now, matchers are basically, like the basic ones we have are things like be, contain, have things that are like coded into the language. So let's look at our spec matchers real quick. So the built-in matchers have things like expect it not to be empty, expect something to equal something, expect it to, you know, optional identities, because of course it does. Expect it to be within, expect it to contain exactly. Stuff that is really all about, like, just the language itself. But we can have more specific matchers. So there's rspec matcher be valid. So there are Rails matchers, including be new record, be valid. Right? So what we can say here is, maybe instead of saying expect new article valid.to be false, I'm going to say that I expect new article to, well, I want to say be valid, but I want the opposite of that, right? Is there a not be valid? Well, no, there's not, but what there is that I can say that I expect new article not to be valid. David, what's the point of line 8? Just reading it right off the board, right? Does exactly what it says in the 10. For examples, the values. Okay. Now, there's .to, and of course there's .not to. There's also to not. I remember doing this one, not for the first time, but kind of like really getting into what it did. And anyone know Sadie Freeman? She does like the intro course right now. She comes in, she's one of the alumni. I remember looking over Sadie's stuff, and I did not to in lecture. And I remember looking over her code, and she had written to not. And I said, Sadie, I'm pretty sure it's not to, not to, not. And to which she said, like, really? Because I've been using to not to. And then I said, okay, but if it doesn't work, just to let you know, you're going to have to change every 2 not 2 not 2. And she said, well, if mine works, then maybe you have to change every not 2 2 2 not. And we giggled. So 2 not and not 2 both work because Ruby. Because what's one of the things about the Ruby world is they wanted to give you as many ways as possible to express the same thing. So 2 not 2. And you guys thought I was going to make a stupid Hamlet joke. Somebody was like, is he going to do the stupid Hamlet joke? Is he going to? No. But I am going to look for credit for not having made it. Okay, so we expect new article not to be valid. And why, or maybe I should rename this just to make it more clear. Not to be valid. Okay. So this uses a Rails RSpec matcher, something that's specific to Rails. I want to take a moment and talk about matchers in general. So for instance, there is a framework that kind of helps us test React apps called Enzyme, not that enzyme. JavaScript testing utilities for React from the Airbnb folks. And it has, let me go to this one. It actually has a set of matchers of its own. Full DOM rendering. Enzyme matchers. Let's take a look at those. So these are things like, okay, that's the license. Uses Lerna. Just enzyme matchers. So matchers that mean something in React. To have expected to have prop, to have state, to have ref, to have tag name, to have text, to include text, to have value, to match element, to match selector, right? These things, are they going to be useful in every single app you ever make in every framework in JavaScript? Like, would this be useful for a Node app? Like, I mean, it's kind of specific, right? Your Node app might want things like check to see if routes work, or you might have a connects app where you want to check the next thing. So this is really specific to React, and that's cool. So we can have specific matches for React, and then instead of being like, oh, I'm going to go into the prop stuff and look for that, and that means a thing, it's like, oh, to have prop. Okay, dope. All right, code. All right, so there's the Rails RSpec matcher. Now, I'm going to bring in some more matchers. And I'm going to bring in a library called shoulda. Shoulda. Simple one-liner test for Rails. Should validate uniqueness of. It should validate. We can also use the expect syntax. So yeah, we're just going to bring these in. I'm going to go to the docs. So we're going to bring in our shoulda matchers. I don't know why I just did that. Put that in my gem file. Put it in. I don't have a group specifically for test, so I'm going to make a group for test. Gem shoulda matchers. Vital complete. Cool, cool, cool. And then I need to add this to my config. So this is going to go in my Rails helper in my spec folder. So I'm going to copy this whole thing here. I'm going to go to my Rails helper. It says RSpec configure to config. I think I can put it here. I'm going to say I want this to work with RSpec, not anything else. And instead of choosing these libraries, I'm going to say all of the above Rails. Okay, now that that is there, when I go to my article spec, I say it must have some content. I can also say, I hope this just, yeah, it is expected to and validate presence of content. Well, is expected to is from our spec. That's kind of the longer version of expect something. So this is like me doing expect onto the it and validate presence of content. So, not bundle. Okay, so let's look at this failure. Is expected, right? Sorry, it is. It is expected. Dot to. Which means you can also use not to. Okay, let's take a look. Article did not proper validate. That content cannot be empty falsy. After setting content to nil, the matcher expected the article to be invalid, but it was valid instead. Wait, what happened? Could we get a, like, that's a pretty clear description of exactly what happened with this test. After setting content to nil, the matcher expected the article to be invalid, but it was valid instead. Dang, that is specific. All right, so I'm going to just look for article RB. Validates content. Presence true. And now. For example, 0 failures, 2 pending. Dope. Okay, well, that is awesome. At least I think so. Right, we're at 10:30. I'm also at limited battery life, so maybe I should just, maybe rather than going and scrounging for a charger, I should just wrap up. All right, one last big thing to talk about. Okay, there is a common saying in OOP, object-oriented programming. There's what's called the gorilla banana problem. Has anyone heard of the gorilla banana problem? It's basically you want a banana, but what you got was the banana and the gorilla holding it and the entire jungle. So, in other words, if you want to work on one thing, you can never really work on one thing because it's all interconnected. Functional programming usually is a little more easily to test for that reason. And that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means it kind of has other dependencies and that sort of thing. And one of the dependencies for models is usually the database. You just check to see if the database, you know, has what we would like it to have. So that means that sometimes in order for us to check on something, we have to create something else. We have to be able to create these objects that kind of are able to sit in our memory or our database and like just exist. In the world of Mocha, like these things exist, but one of the things that we often end up doing is we do end up doing what we call hooks, before and after. And this happens in our spec as well. We can do before and after. So for instance, if I wanted to create a comment on an article, and I'm testing the comment class, I still have to create an article first, right? So I might create an article beforehand, have access to it, make sure that this works, give it an article. Okay, totally valid, awesome. And then after that, my after is, okay, I'm going to delete all my comments. I'm going to delete all my articles. Now, you just heard me say a few scary things, right? Like, did everyone catch, like, a moment of pure, like, ice in your veins for a moment? Delete all my comments? Delete all my articles? What? No. Why is that? Why would that be bad? Delete all my articles. Delete all my comments. It's fine. Create new test data, right? And why would that sound like a terrifying thing? Because, like, is that a production? Like, delete all the articles on my website, on my actual, like, app running? So one of the things is that when you do a development, you might have seen when you set up a database that, let me see if I can find the SQLite 3 here. Yeah, it sets up a development SQLite 3, which is the thing that you're going to be working on. Maybe you put your stuff in there and you're like, blah, 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 right? And that might even be really important to you, being able to like just check to see if features work or kind of develop against them. So what this does is sets up a test library, a test database. So you're not going to be actually touching your real live data. So don't worry about this data. It's going to be created and it's going to be gone. All right? I have like a blade of grass. So, but this being Rails, we want to kind of create like really, we want to be able to create objects in data that are like really predictable. Almost like we have a cast of characters that we can kind of create stuff on. We have one article that we can kind of create what we want. We know how it works. We know it's valid. We know it's yada, 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 right? So what I can do is bring in a library called FactoryBot. A library for setting up Ruby objects. Now I have to, this used to be called Factory Girl, like a year or so ago. It was still called Factory Girl from a Rolling Stones song. So you may see some references in documentation to Factory Girl. You may hear someone who's been doing Ruby on Rails longer than a year be like, oh yeah, just do a FactoryBot thing. Like they'll do that. Obviously, a year ago it changed because of our ever-changing social context, namely the replacement of human labor in the manufacturing industry. Why? Did something else happen? Did anything else happen? Did someone not tell me about that? Well, I like that joke, so shut up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add FactoryBot, but I'm specifically going to add FactoryBot Rails. Generally speaking, and this is actually kind of true of a lot of frameworks, is that if you have a framework and you want to use some other library with it, check to see if there's a version specific to that framework. If you want to use like there's a drag and drop library called Dragula, check to see if there's a Dragula React if you're using React. Check to see if there's a Dragula Vue if you're using Vue. So FactoryBot Rails. Guys are a tough crowd. I can appreciate that. You make me work for it. So I'm going to go back to my gem file here. Group development test. Gem FactoryBot Rails. I added something to my gem file, so I had to bundle. So I have generators. I'm thinking, and I'm not sure it's telling me, there's a configuration page here. So if you're using Rails, you can do rspec.configure do config. So this now goes into my rspec config on my spec helper. So spec helper. I have rspec.configure.do config, or configure do config. And so at the end here, as the last thing, I'm going to write right before the end config.include FactoryBot syntax methods, not bundle. The bundle doesn't make sense. Right, rspec cucumber spinach. Okay, so this is going to, so it's going to look for spec/factories.rb. So I'm going to create just a file here. It says factories.rb. I can also do a factories folder. Factory user. So I'm going to do a factory article here. Do title dope jiggity, which is something that Don and I made up, and I think I kind of like it. Content. Words, man. Just words. And I'm going to put a publish date. Publish date is going to be 2 days ago. Okay. And make sure this still works without having, yeah, uninitialized constant factory bot. Right, I knew that would do a thing. Right. Unused constant factory bot, or uninitialized content. I know that I just have to, and spec helper requires support factory bot. Okay, that's what I was missing. Require. Require factory bot. Yes. Cool. So, right, now I have this factory article, and in my article spec, I can say must have content that passes an obscenity filter. Let's do must have a publish date. Let's do that one. I think that's the safer one to do in a class. So what I can do here is just say, where's the example I was just looking at? C configuration. So if I'm not using that, config before suite, factory bot find definitions, yada yada yada. Define a factory. So I use a factory here, factory admin class user, the class program. So user equals factory bot supports several different build strategies: build, create, attributes for, and build stub. So I am going to user is create, or article equals build article. So build article. Just going to run that, make sure it doesn't cause an error. So I'm going to say that article.content is, or .publish date is nil. Is nil. Oh, even better actually. I'm going to describe a has been published. How about that? Describe, I'm going to put a hashtag has been published. Do end. And I'm going to say context date in the past. Do end. It is false. So let's see if we got, yeah, and the past date is false. Date in the future. Date in the present or future. It is true. So here I can do end article equals build article. I expect article dot has been published to be false. Of course, it's going to give me the problem that to be published, not found. All right. Article def has been published. I'm going to return, what is it, the publish date? Publish date, bang equals nil, and publish date is less than, is it now? Is it today? I keep on forgetting the Ruby today's date. I guess it's just date.today. All right, so I'm going to expect in the context, date is nil, do it is false. Yeah, I'm going to expect article build article dot publish date is nil. Expect has been published to be false. Article dot publish date equals 2 days from now. Expect it to be false, and it is true. In the sorry, if it's in the past, it's in the future that it should be false. In the present, do article equals, actually let's just run these for a second and see what happens. So yeah, we have a couple of passes here, and then date in the present, so it is true. Do end article equals build article expect, or not expect, I'm going to say article dot publish date equals date dot today, and I expect article dot has been published to be true. It's false. Expect the true got false. All right, let's go to the article. Less than or equal. Okay. And then I can say back here one more. Now I keep on doing this article equals build article. What I could do for this entire test here, describe has been published do, I can say, and you'll see this in the better specs, subject, use subject. So I can say subject assigns message, so I can say here subject build article. So now I do that once, and I'm going to say expect, and I can even give it a name, subject article, and so now I don't have to have this line in each one of them. I don't think, at least. Let's find out. Yeah, still good. Yeah. You could use, and then you could use the it is expected, and then you can kind of have things in there. So I'm sort of manipulating it a bit. I think there is a subject dot something. I just wanted to use, since I'm using a subject, I may as well put in a name. I'm actually like changing it in some ways. If I just, in fact, there's one here where I didn't change anything. Date in the present, context, date in the past. And I know the default behavior for this subject is to be in the past. So I'm going to say it is expected and I think I can kind of get the actual, like to have has been published. I'm not exactly sure how to expected to match. It was born, yeah. Use subject to drive them up. So I might just go back to saying, yeah, it is true, do article dot days ago has been published to be true. Okay, so now I have these object definitions that I can now put into somewhere else. And I can start to actually like create personas. An example here that I'm going to give you, and I really want you to more kind of look at this as like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I can create these aliases of author and commenter that has this stuff. Factory post author, factory post commenter, right? And I can have transient attributes. Factory user transit do rockstar upcase. So, yeah. That's another example here. There's inheritance. So I can have an approved post, which is like the parent post, except for the fact that it's approved is true. So I can make posts in the past. I can make all these different ones one at a time and kind of do things about them. I can create associations between things, including being able to change stuff in here. Now the question is, and this is a thing to which I had the answer before, and I'm just going to double check, factory bot build change. Yeah, it said transient properties up here, right? I think transient too. No, that's just at the factory. So factory build change item change attribute. Passing certain attributes. So apparently, and I'm learning this now. So subject articles build article. What I can say is article equals build article. Publish date is nil. Article equals build. So I know everything else about the article is like valid. Based on this, I can just kind of have things so I'm not like messing with other stuff. So article this date that today. And God willing, yeah, these are all working. Except I have one. Of course, I haven't done that obscenity filter, but everything else works just fine. So I can build something with like specific stuff, and I can also start building out comments where I have like, if I did articles and then comments, I can say, hey, when I build the comment object, I want it to be linked to this article to start with. Yes. This is good. These examples are good. Because I'm just wanting to build an article, but with these things true. And because I don't know about how the rest of my code's going to work. I'm going to make sure it's otherwise a totally valid / normal thing, and then put something else in there. Mm-hmm. Yes. And yeah, and this also lets me check to see like, hey, did these things create? So I would recommend using build when you're checking validators rather than using create, because create will attempt to create and the validator will break, and maybe that's not for reasons you want it to. So yeah. So that is FactoryBot, and FactoryBot does a lot of the things we wanted it to do. Did I write factory? Yeah, I wrote FactoryBot. There's a great FactoryBot cheat sheet that has been very helpful. Attributes for build stub, build user named John, create list, build list. Yeah, you can also link FactoryBot to Faker, and then you can have good old Faker data, which is awesome. Okay, I'm pretty much done. So I want to kind of go back and just talk about the beauty of automated testing. Automated testing is more work. And when you are not that good with it, it is extra more work. There is something just popped up that I'm actually kind of interested in taking myself to find out more. But there is a testing JavaScript guide out there with Kent C. Dodds. There's a lot of training about the testing in general. And the great part about testing is that for me, I will tell you that my career, the times where my soul is being absolutely drained out of my nose has been when I have had to go back and debug code that didn't work. Nothing is worse than that one bit of code that you know if you rewrite, you will break everything. That bit of code is just on your mind. Like, it is just in your periphery, but it's just like, yeah, you want to try something? So, having a testing framework of some sort, having some sort of testing that knows like, hey, I'll let you know if things break, it's a magic green light that lets you know that it's a source of security. And it's something that will keep you from having, I would much rather do testing than do like aimless crazy debugging. Testing is an upfront cost, debugging is an at the end cost. And the testing, it kind of helps to ensure that your focus is on production, not on the unplanned changes. Is it something you should consider doing for your final project? I will say that the benefit of testing raises with the longevity of your project. So doing testing on your project, I mean, it'd be a good thing to kind of look into, like, okay, what can we do? What can we test? Especially if there's something that's like really cheap and easy. But that said, you might not get all the benefit from it because it is an upfront cost. And what you're creating, like, I don't do testing, generally speaking, when I'm just making a prototype. Although sometimes I'll be testing just to, like, unless I am prototyping, testing. I can tell you that unreservedly. We just had a big conversation as instructors recently about, like, we are hearing about testing. Is this something we can do? Some employers will be all for it. Some people will be like, no, that's going to cost production things. And it's just like, yeah, okay. But it is a skill in and of itself. It is like every other dev skill. It takes time. And it takes time to build up, and it takes making a few mistakes. But it is definitely the putting on your shoes before running away from the bear, right? You'll be faster than your friend who is, in this case, I always think of that as like, you know the joke I'm talking about? About these two friends are in the forest, and they see a bear coming down, and one stops to take sneakers out of his bag and put them on. And the other guy says, what are you doing? You can't run faster than the bear. And he says, I don't have to run faster than the bear. I just have to outrun you, right? When I think about that, I think of me without, I think of that the person without putting on his sneakers is me without doing good prep. And that me putting on my sneakers is me doing good prep. So it's like, it's me out chasing like these two parallel universe versions of myself, right? Now, if the bear gets me while I'm putting on my sneakers, that's not good. But if I have a little more time than that, then I'm going to outrun that other version of me. Yeah, that 2-week final might be the bear catching. But then again, there's also going to be like, I have seen some projects that have a lot of back-end debugging. So right now, manual testing and just a lot of manual testing is probably going to put you in good stead. And just kind of making sure that your code, like just seeing that your code works instead of being like, oh, I wrote the right code. Yay. How do you know you wrote the right code? Look at it. It's good. It's right. My code is perfect. That code is neither perfect nor yours. So just check to make sure it works. Whatever you're doing, check to make sure that it works. All right. Thank you all so very much. My battery is low. My coffee cup is low. I'll have notes for you for too long here.